Good evening, and welcome to Fall for the Books Choose Your Own Twine Adventure Interactive Fiction Workshop, brought to you in partnership with the Gaithersburg Book Festival. My name is Susie Rigdon, and I'm the festival manager here. I'm so excited to introduce Alex Boyd, who's going to be leading our workshop tonight. We first came across Alex's work called Trail. It was a Bitsy game and a Twine game in the Climates of Change exhibit, which we partnered with the Electronic Literature Organization, the University of Central Florida, for our Fall 2020 festival. Alex is a digital media master's student at the University of Central Florida, and he's really interested in interactive experimental internet art and video games. So I teach digital creative writing here at Mason, and one of the perennial favorites of both me and the students is Twine as a tool to use. So we'll be working with fiction tonight, but I also want to let you know if you're interested in writing nonfiction, especially nonlinear nonfiction or interactive poetry, Twine is a great platform as well. So please go ahead and click the green button below the screen. That's going to open up twinery.org. Alex will show you how to do this, but we invite you to code along with Alex, to write along with Alex. We're going to have some polls to help Alex decide where the story is going to go. So you'll also find that poll button right at the bottom. You'll see it turn orange when we release it. But thank you so much for being here. We're so thrilled to have this pop-up lit night, and we hope you enjoy. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Alex Boyd.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. As Susie said, you are more than welcome to follow along as we go about making our own story here in Twine. If you go to twinery.org, and there's a link here that just says use it online. Just click on that and click on this green button here that says story, and you can start your own story and follow along as we go. So Twine is an amazing interactive or amazing software to tell your own interactive and nonlinear stories. You can create these amazing branching narratives that create really unique experiences for players. But before we get started, I wanted to point out a couple things first. One, there are multiple different versions of Twine or story formats of Twine, and you can find that here if you go to this little hamburger menu on the bottom left corner. You can change your story format, and you can see that there's a series of different story formats here that you can choose from, and these are geared towards different audiences and their interests. So for example, Harlow, which we're going to be working in, is more geared towards beginners. If you don't have any experience with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc., you can really step into this just fine. And Sugar Cube, for example, is going to expect you to have a bit more programming experience going into it. But we're going to be working in Harlow, more specifically Harlow 3.2.1, as they've added a lot of great functionality that makes it easier for beginners to get acclimated to making a story in Twine. So let's go ahead and get started here. So we will be going over some very basic CSS, but we're mostly going to be staying, mostly within the language of Harlow. So if I'm doing anything that seems a little bit foreign to you in, programming ways, don't worry about it. It'll all make sense when we put everything together. So when I'm making a story in Twine, I like to start with a really interesting title screen. And so let's go ahead and do that in our story here. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a couple of things that I found online to make our story just look a little bit better. We're going to do this inside of our style sheet. For those of you that have worked with HTML or CSS before, the same exact principles apply. So I have found a font online that I've already determined that I want to use, and you can pull this from the Google Fonts website. Don't feel obligated to follow along with anything that is using links, as that might be difficult to do on the spot, but this won't impede any kind of functionality that we're going to be adding. So I found this font on Google that I want to use, and then I'm also going to change a couple things in our story. I want to change the default background of our passages And then I also want to change the color of our text as well as the color of our links, which will make more sense in just a minute. So I'm going to start doing that by just adding some basic CSS. I'm going to change the background color to a color that I've found already that I'm interested in using. And I'm also going to change the font color. And this is just going to be a type of white font. Don't want to forget your semicolons. So what I just did is using some of the built-in CSS tags in Twine. The TW story allows you to apply changes to your entire Twine story. And now I'm going to use another one called TW-link. And this is only going to change the hypertext links that are in Twine. So I'm just going to change this to an orange, which you can just use the word orange to accomplish that. Great. And this is all we're going to do as far as adding things to our style sheet. And now we're actually going to start getting into the individual passages of Twine. So there are two things that you really need to keep in mind when working in Harlow. And it boils down to the core functionality of the language. There's two terms you need to know, and it's going to be macros and hooks. Macros are commands that change the text or our story in some way, and hooks are what is being changed by that macro. So for example, let's say we wanted to add an effect to a line of text that we have here. Now we could do that by accessing the macro menu here. This is a full list of all the macros that is included in Harlow 3. And you can filter it through this menu here, but this can be a little bit overwhelming. When I first started, I found it to be helpful to have the documentation for Harlow pulled up while we work, but that's just a side note. But when we're styling text, you can also use this style button here. And what you can do is make various changes, like make the text bold. We can underline it, add a wavy strike. We'll apply a shadow or emboss or blur the text, and then add various effects, etc. You fill in what you like, and then you just click add. And you'll see that the software adds all the necessary changes that you're looking for, and you can go ahead and put in your text for what you want that style to be. So some text, and if we test it out, you can see it's applied that style to the text that we've added there. So you can see that macros here are going to be in between our parentheses, and then the hooks are what are inside the square brackets. All right, so let's get started actually making our story. For this workshop, we're going to be making our own version of Aladdin. So let's go ahead and start putting this together. And we're going to do that with our title screen. I always personally like to add an interesting title screen to my Twine games. And so the way we can do that is we're going to use the change macro to achieve this. So using the change macro, I am going to be changing the background image of our first page that the player is going to be interacting with. You do this using the change macro, and we use the built-in hook called page. Now there's a handful of built-in hooks, and I won't go into too much detail about this, but just so you know, if you encounter a hook that has a question mark in front of it, what that means is it's a built-in hook into Twine. They added this so that there are certain aspects of these passages that you couldn't normally customize with macros. So they've added this functionality so that you can do that. Now I've already found an image that I wanted to use online. So you can feel free to do the same if you're following along. You can pull any image and add it to achieve this. And by using the background macro, I'm referencing this image that was found online. So you may notice here that we have combined macros. We've used two macros to achieve something. And this is something you can absolutely do in Harlow. You can combine a whole slew of macros to achieve the style or look that you're going for. So we're going to do that now with our title of our story here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the color macro, change the text to white. And then I'm going to use the plus symbol to add more macros to my hook. And we won't be doing this a lot, but I just wanted to take this moment to show that a macro that's very useful called the Css Macro, where those of you that are familiar with any CSS, you can actually apply your own inline CSS to a hook that you want to customize. So I'm going to use that to actually apply the font that I found online to our title. This was the, I believe, Beth Ellen font. Cursive. And I'm going to add one more macro to change the text size of our title. Got my opening parentheses. Perfect. So we have everything that we wanted to change, and now we want to go ahead and add that to our title, which is our hook, and that's going to be Aladdin. And whenever you've added something, you can check your progress by clicking the play button here. And you can see that we've added our own interesting background and a nice title to our story. Now we need to allow the user to go ahead and move on to the other passages that we're going to make in this story. And we do that through hyperlinks. And so the act of doing this in Twine is called link markup. And the way you do that is by using two square brackets. Now, if you just type in any text, so let's say we want to take this to scene 1, for example. When you create a hyperlink with just some plain text, it is going to create a new passage for you with the name, using that text as the name for the passage. But you don't always want to do that because you want to use a different text for the user to click that's different from the name of the passage that you want to proceed to. So I'm going to say, give them a nice start button to click. And by using the dash symbol and a closing caret bracket, we can actually point to another passage that we want to use. So I'm just going to name it Begin. And now you can see that we've created our next passage here, titled Begin. And this is where we're going to start our story. All right. So a real common functionality that you're going to find in a lot of Twine games that you play are something called link reveals, where the user clicks on some text on the page and it's going to reveal more information on that specific passage. They're not going to be linked to a different passage. It's all going to happen there in that same individual passage. So let's go ahead and create our first link reveal. So let's do some nice filler text, let the player know who they are. Your name is Aladdin. But we want the Aladdin text to be what is going to reveal the rest of the passage. So the way we can do that, you can type everything out, but if you're new to Harlow or Twine, you can just use this link element button here. and you can type in the text that you want to act as a link. And the type of hook we want. There we go. So the way we want our text reveal to work is to reveal the rest of our passage, and the rest of our passage is going to serve as a hook. So the way this will work, so we select the remainder of the passage, and then we want to unlink the text that was formerly the link, because there's no reason for the user to have to click on that any longer. So as I add this in, it adds a link reveal for the text Aladdin, and you can see that there's an open-ended hook here. And what that means is that anything after this hook is going to be revealed by the link reveal. It will serve as, the remainder of the hook. Now the catch is if this encounters another link reveal, it's only going to reveal up to that second link reveal, which will make more sense as we go along. So let's add some more information here. You live scraps of Agrabah. Street rat. Right. And now what I want to do here is add some flavor to my text. For certain keywords, I want it to, come to life a little bit. Now you can do this by using the styles button here to add the customization to the text like we did previously. That's totally fine. But I wanted to show you some very cool functionality that you can do in Harlow, which is called the Enchant Macro. Now what the Enchant Macro does is it is going to actually, you're going to specify a string of text that you want to change. And any time that that text appears throughout your passage, it will apply those changes. So we're going to do that for the street rat text here. Enchant, we're going to say street rat is what we're changing. And now we need to tell the macro what kind of changes we want to apply. So I'm going to use the text style macro again. Apply a shadow. And we want the text to move around a little bit to animate. It's going to fidget around just a smidge. We're going to add fidget to that. Perfect. And then I'm also going to make it so that street rat is clickable, and it's going to reveal the rest of our passage. Okay. Remember, since we wanted to reveal the rest of the passage, it's going to be an open-ended hook. Just add some more flavor here. And the last word of our sentence, I'm going to make the link to our next passage. Start. Excellent. So let's go take a second to see how that looks. So you can see that our link is highlighting properly. We changed the color to orange, and our customization is applying to the word street rat. A little bit hard to see. This is a great time for testing where you can make changes to make these kinds of things have more impact in your stories, but we won't worry about that for this workshop. And then we'll go ahead and move on to our next passage. Great. So we are moving right along. So I'm going to go ahead and write out the next passage. And while that's going on, go ahead and vote on the poll to see what kind of food we're going to have Aladdin steal, because that's kind of where we're going to be leading things here, to create some interesting choices for our player to make as we start to branch out into different narratives. So we want to take some time to really establish our world. A great part of Twine is that you can really allow your words to really build out your environment and the stories, and then it's going to be supplemented with the styling. So if you kind of want to focus more on just the story writing of it, this is a great time to do that. Okay. So one thing that you might notice as I'm going along is I'm going to be adding multiple link reveals to our text here. Now, this is totally up to personal preference and the way that you want to present your story. The way I usually make Twine stories is I like to keep the user engaged, have them interact frequently with what is happening on screen. If I'm just bombarding them with a whole bunch of text, it can be, a little bit overwhelming, or it can be straining to try and just, read all this text on a screen. So by breaking up the flow with the user having to interact to progress the story, it creates a nice balance between the information that you're providing to them and the way that they're accessing it. So I'm going to create another link reveal here to add more to our story. All right. So it looks like wine was the winner for what kind of food or drink that we're going to steal. So let's go ahead and establish that in our story. Sorry for any typos. Twine does not have a any kind of text editing catching, so always want to run your story text through Word or something, or word processor. All right, we're going to create a link to our next passage. So let's take a quick second here to go through what we have so far. We have our nice title page that the user clicks start, brings them right to the beginning of the story. We have a nice stylized background, establishing the environment that we're in, the whole story, adding some styling to some of the text, keeping the user engaged. Moving on to the next passage, which I've added a different background to this here. Great. Everything's looking good. And now we're going to present an opportunity for some interesting user interaction. All right. I'm just going to pull from that same background. And let's go ahead and present an opportunity for some interesting user interaction. So in the crowded streets, bob and weave your way through until you spot. Let's see, we want some wine. We'll say a wine stand. Why not? And I'm going to add a nice little link reveal here. Take a closer look. So link reveals are a great way for the user to actually click on something to take action, which is, like I said previously, just a really great way to keep the user engaged with what's happening. So you have been, let's add some stakes here to this situation, since Aladdin is the kind of person I feel would be stealing quite frequently from these merchants. So you have been caught red-handed many times in these streets. Enough for the shopgoers. Nice you on site. Do one more link reveal there. Perfect. So now we are going to introduce our first branching opportunity for a branching narrative here. We're going to let the user decide what it is they want to do, how they want to go about approaching stealing some of this wine. So we're going to create two opportunities for this. We can either create a distraction, or the less exciting opportunity is wait until the shopkeep to a customer. And that will lead to the customer route. Okay. So now we have our first branching narrative where we're letting the user decide what we want to happen. So for the sake of time, we're only going to focus on a handful of paths here that the user can take. But as we go along, you're going to notice that it's very easy for things to really start to get out of control. You'll end up having a lot of loose ends and that you have to tie up somehow and create endings for. So scale is really important when you're working with Twine stories. It's very easy for this to, kind of spiral out of control, and then you end up, it's very easy to end up with a lot of endings that just don't seem very satisfying to the user in any way. So let's go ahead and keep with the making a distraction. Again, I'm just applying the background that we've been using previously. So we are creating a distraction. Let's see here. Yeah, let's go with creating a distraction, not going with the disguise. So let's say you see a collection of pots. I instruct Abu to link reveal here. All right. Okay. So here we are going to allow for some stakes that are outside the control of the user. So one of the big things about Twine is that you can have, a set of parameters for something, and the result is out of control of the user. So for example, let's say the rolling of a dice, and based on the result of that roll, something is going to happen. And the way that we do that is through using a new set of macros that we haven't gone over yet, but it's going to be we're going to go over the set macro, using variables to store information, the random macro to create a number that's going to be stored in that variable, and then conditional statements to determine what is going to happen as a result. And this is where Twine can just really, really shine with how you're going to create meaningful experiences for the player. So let's go ahead and set the stage for this. So as Abu breaks a pot, we're going to add another link reveal here. And one interesting thing that you can do with link reveals is that a link reveal can also contain, the remainder of our code that we're going to be using to create this experience. So reach for the, or I'm sorry, we said wine. All right. Now, it's really important when you're creating opportunities for user choice and user action to have some kind of stakes to it. You want to avoid the illusion of choice. If you fall into that trap of, you let the user, sure, make a lot of different choices, but in the end, it doesn't really mean much because they're being pinned into a particular plot line that you really are, focusing on. And that can be a unsatisfying experience to a player, because then they're thinking, oh, my choices aren't really making any difference here. I'm just kind of on, experiencing an on-rails experience, and I can pick anything and nothing really changes. So you want to make sure the choices that you present to the user have stakes to them, and those stakes feel meaningful in some way. And we'll do our best here. I mean, we're just, making up a quick Aladdin story, but as you're working on your own story, you can really delve deep into these, this core functionality that we're about to go over, and utilize it in a myriad of different ways that suits your own story. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to explain everything as we go along. So I'm going to be using the set macro. And remember, keep in mind, all these macros you can find in the macro browser here. I'm just typing it out so that we can make sure we get through everything. And I'm going to be using the set macro to set a variable to a value. Now, for those of you that might not be familiar with what a variable is, think of it as a container to store data. And we can reference that container to make changes along our story. So I'm going to create a variable here called distract. And now this, in the syntax of Harlow, you follow the set macro with the variable name, and then now we need to tell it what it's going to set that variable to. So we say set the name of our variable to, and we're going to use another macro here called the random macro. And think of the random macro as kind of just like a roll of the dice. You give it a set range of numbers to roll from, and it's going to return an integer based on its result. So I'm going to say, let's say we're rolling a 6-sided dice here, and I want to set the return of that roll to our distract variable. So once our passage reaches this point, as after you click reach for the wine, and it then populates the rest of the passage, this code is going to be running, and this isn't going to be seen, by the user, obviously. And we'll go into more detail about how you can track this stuff as you go along, as soon as we get through it. So we're going to be using a set of conditional statements here to tell our passage to do something based on these results. So we're going to say if our distract variable is greater than or equal to 2, we're going to do something. So if you're not familiar with conditional statements in programming, the easiest way to just kind of think about it in more just normal language is, if I do this thing, then do this. So, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. If this certain parameter is met, do this. And in the syntax of Harlow, that's going to be done through, just as we discovered, the use of a macro and a hook to do so. So if our distract is greater than or equal to 2, we are going to create another variable here. We're going to name this our wine variable. And we are going to give it the value of 1. So a really interesting thing, so to elaborate more about the way that you can take this functionality and apply it in many, many different ways. It doesn't really have to be just this. You don't have to just roll a number and respond to what it is. You can use these same things to create an inventory system for the user. Like if you want them to move along and collect items throughout your story, you can do that just by using variables. So let's say, for example, you wanted a user to collect a series of coins throughout the story. Every time they collected a coin, you could add to that variable so that at the end of the game, you can count up everything that they have and have some kind of dynamic response based on what they found throughout their playthrough. One student that I've worked with in the past who used Twine for poetry is that she made it so that as the user was going through this story, this environment, they were collecting pieces of the poem, and she used variables to keep track of that. So by the end of the story, if the user collected enough of the pieces of the poem, at the end of the game, it would all be put together into just so that they could read the full poem. If they failed, they obviously wouldn't get to read the whole thing. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about these things. It doesn't just have to be this. This can be applied in many different ways. So let's say you succeed. Oh. All right, in stealing the wine, and make your way back to, oops, to home. And in this circumstance, since the name of my next passage is just going to be the same as the text that we're using here, I'm just going to leave it as home, and it's going to create that next passage for us. So now in this conditional, everything is contained into this hook. We have we've obtained the wine. We've set that value to 1 to say that, okay, this is true. We do have this this item, and the rest of the hook contains the rest of the message that contains the link to the next passage. Now, let's say that the user does not succeed in this role. We're going to have an else statement to take care of that for us. So if the role is not greater than or equal to 2, we're going to say the merchant catches you. Let's add some interesting text to this. Just add a nice text rumble here. Merchant catches you. And we're going to let the user try to evade. All right. Excellent. All right, so now let's focus on a nice, meaningful way that a user can take the things that they have in their inventory and do something with it and create some meaningful story moments with the user's action. So let's say Aladdin succeeds and he's heading home. So as we journey back home, you notice small family for, say, some food. So we decided to steal some wine, but that's okay. Maybe we can give them this this wine to sell, and then they can in turn use that money to get some food here. Right. So feeling bad, you give the family the wine and instruct them, let's tell them to sell it for money. Now, of course, this could be an opportunity for user choice. Do you want to allow the user to help them or not? Are there any consequences that you want to apply to that decision that they're making? This is where Twine can really, facilitate those kinds of decisions. But for the sake of time, since we're running a little bit low on time here, let's say that the user does in fact decide to give them this wine. So give wine. All right. So now what we need to do as a result of this, we need to make sure that we take away that item from the user's inventory. And you just simply do that by resetting your variable to 0, to the equivalent of it being false. And let the user know you hand the family your bread, your wine. Since they take it. So we'll leave that potential arc of action there, because at the end of this, you're going to have access to this file that you can reference, that you can change, manipulate, work with to create your own spin on the story and what you find interesting. Okay. So we are running a little bit low on time here. So I want to go ahead and move on to another type of functionality that you can have here to really add more to the kind of user interaction that you can have. It's not just limited to clicking. You can actually take in user input. And then at the end, I'm going to go over everything that we've done and kind of elaborate more on how these results lead to different things, and we can open up the discussion for questions. So while I'm doing this, we're actually going to do another poll. We're going to ask you, what do we want Aladdin to wish for? So in this scenario, Aladdin has made it to the Cave of Wonders. He's found the lamp, summoned the genie, and he is going to make his wish. What do we want his wish to be? So I'm going to say, I've arrived at the cave to the pile of treasure and found. All right. So the way that you can take in user input is by actually creating a text box that they can type into, and you can assign their input to a variable that you can then return to the user. So this is a great way that you can add real personal touches to the stories that you're making. And the way you go about doing that is by using the input box macro. We're telling it to assign what is in there to the variable wish. I'll explain this in just a second. Okay, so we have our input box. And what this means here is this is just, I won't go too much into the specifics, but this just denotes the size of the box and how wide it is. And there's some filler text to let the user know what to do. So you have to make your wish. Rub the lamp. Great genie emerges. Wish. Follows the genie which and say, and then just by simply calling on that variable, it will present the user with that string. So let's go ahead and try that out. So make your wish. What would we like the wish for? More, more wine, everybody could be rich, a steady job, and house. Let's go with Aladdin seems to really like this wine, so let's go with more wine as our wish here. Make your wish. So you rub the lamp, the great genie emerges, make your wish, he bellows, and we are returning our wish to the user. Now, of course, you can make this more interesting. So we have a question about the user input. Does the code, let's see, is there code to save user inputs, or does it go away when they're done? So this is exactly how you go about doing it. If you want to hang on to the user's input, you assign it to a variable, and that way you can reference that variable throughout your story and hang on to that. So let's say, for example, you wanted to keep multiple different inputs from the user. What you would need to do is create different variables for each one. So as we're wrapping up here, I want to bring over a more fleshed out version of our story here. And then this can really communicate to you all as well how things can really just start to, the amount of choices that you have and the amount of loose ends that you have to fill in can really start to get a little bit crazy. So this is the project file that you're all going to get to reference and work with. So we have these various scenes where Aladdin is grabbing some food. That's leading to a distraction that he's trying to make, and we're responding to the user, user's desires. If they want to try this, we're seeing, if they succeed or not in that kind of interaction. We're adding some stakes to what's happening. It's not guaranteed. And you can continue to apply this further on. So for example, in this scene here, Aladdin is trying to escape, the grasp of the merchant. And if he can't get away, if he doesn't succeed in his role to get away, we have to take that and account for it and make something meaningful out of that. So we have a few loose ends here where Aladdin ends up going to jail because he ends up getting caught. Here, for example, here's an example of him giving his food to the family, or you end up keeping that thing that you steal for yourself, and you can create your own, story arc using user decision. Because really, at the end of the day, you can really go in with any story that you really want to, and as long as you're providing the user with like these meaningful experiences for interaction and choice, and they have consequences, you're well on your way to creating a very interesting and engaging Twine game. So absolutely take the time to browse through this file and go through everything. Keep in mind the functionality that we went over with variables, and how that can be applied in various different ways. You can have users, you can make a collectathon kind of scenario, something where the user is continuously losing something as they're progressing in the story, that you can really make something interesting with that. But yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there so that we have some time for some further questions. Please, ask anything and everything. Happy to elaborate and explain some things into more detail. And while I'm waiting for questions, I'm going to go ahead and play through this version so you can kind of see how all of that plays out. And you're also going to get a chance to see the debugger and how you can keep track of what's happening in your story while you're playing it. And you can keep track of that right down here in the bottom right corner. I don't know if my face is in the way, so I'm just going to drag that out so you can all see it. This won't be seen by the player when you actually export your project. This is only for you when you're testing inside of Twine. All right. So your name is Aladdin. You live on the scrap streets of Agrabah. Many call you a street rat. Don't like the name, but you've grown all too accustomed to it by now. Your day begins as usual. You search the streets for some food with your monkey companion Abu. The market streets of Agrabah are a bustle with merchant activity. Foods and resources are exchanging hands, a perfect opportunity to try and sneak some food. So in the crowded streets, you bob and weave your way through until you spot a bread stand and take a closer look. You have been caught red-handed many times in these streets, enough for the shopgoers to recognize you on sight. So here we have our first branch. Do we want to create a distraction? Wait for them to speak to a customer. We're going to create a distraction. So keep in mind here, our variables, nothing has happened yet because our link reveal hasn't run the code. So reach for the bread, and you can see now that our variables distract and bread have been declared and set. So we got a return of the number of 5, the number of 1, which means we succeeded, and we have acquired the bread. And so we're going to go ahead and head home, looking for scraps of food. And then here we go. We're going to give the family your food. And you can see now that the bread has been reduced to 0. So they no longer have that item. So we got a question. How do you view other Twine codes? Excellent question. So it's really simple. Twine exports are pretty much just HTML files. So for example, let's say, let me see if I can quickly pull up the link to this. Here we go. Okay, so here's the Twine game hosted on a domain that I have. And let's say I wanted to take this, save it to my computer, open it in Twine. So you just by right-clicking, save as, and it's already generated a name for it, which is affiliated with the text that's in that initial opening scene. Go ahead and save it. And let's go to Twine. And we're going to import from file. Choose from where you have that file saved, open. I'm just going to say don't replace any stories. And there you go. It's going to show up right there. And you can see the full span of the story. Each passage will show up there. Do keep in mind, if you're doing this for more complex Twine games, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by what you see. They can truly get out of hand. And a lot of times people use various amounts of CSS and JavaScript to enhance their experience. And one thing I also wanted to highlight as well, a common feature that people want to include in their story is the use of audio. Out of the box, Harlow does not have any very user-friendly ways to get audio up and running. It takes quite a bit of experience, programming experience to work with that. Sugar Cube, on the other hand, does expect more programming experience, but it does have in some very easy built-in functionality for audio. So if that is a central part of your story, keep that in mind as you're making it. But if there aren't any more questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you, everyone, so much for attending this. I'm going to be sharing my email address as well. For anybody who has questions about Twine, you can reach out. Sorry if we couldn't get to more, story elements here, but I just really wanted to emphasize and make sure everybody at least saw how to use the functionality of Twine to create these meaningful experiences and these meaningful moments of choice and consequence.